Gonzaga has one more game before a much-needed 9-day break. How the Zags rotate the backcourt is one of many things we're going to be watching for against Jackson State this evening.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Folks, right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. It's $150 in your pocket if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Happy Wednesday, folks. We got an end of the non-conference WCC recap. Every team's got one or two games left, so we're going to talk about the WCC, what we've seen, what we unfortunately have not seen from the conference up to this point. We're going to get to all that, closing out the show. But first, we're going to talk about Gonzaga's final game before Christmas, their second to last non-conference game before conference play begins. They do have three more non-con games, as they will, of course, play Kentucky in February. We're going to talk about Jackson State right now. The game, of course, December 20th tonight, as many of you are listening to this show, 6 p.m. Pacific time. The game, as many of these games have been so far this season in the non-conference, at least the home games. The game will be on KHQ and Root for those in market, KHQ for those of you in Spokane, Root for those of you in the Seattle, Portland area, but not exactly in the Spokane market. And then for those of you who are all the way out of market, the game should be on ESPN Plus. If you're having trouble finding the game, watching the game, join us on our Discord channel. We will be able to help point people in the right direction. We have a game threads conversation, kind of help people make sure they can find their way to the game before it starts. We also have conversation throughout the entire game on that Discord channel. Again, it is completely free to join. There is a link in your show notes. Check it out there. So we're going to talk about this game a little bit. It is the third and final SWAC opponent of the year for Gonzaga. They already played Arkansas, Pine Bluff, and Mississippi Valley State earlier in the season. We've talked about this now 3 times on the show. Gonzaga schedules a lot of games against opponents in this SWAC conference. It is a conference full of HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. They are unfortunately very underfunded universities, and in kind of the way that a lot of them have been able to fund their athletic department is by playing these bye games. Schools like Gonzaga and many other programs, including Missouri, we'll talk about them in a second, will pay these teams to fly out to their home arena and play, and typically lose because they are not usually up to the same standard as the teams they are playing. So Gonzaga ended up picking up 3 games against opponents in this conference this season. Jackson State right now is 4-7, and you probably guessed it. One of their wins is on the road against Missouri, the Tigers of the SEC. That's a huge win for Jackson State. They also have wins over Arkansas State, Howard, and North Carolina A&T. Their losses are to a veritable who's who of solid programs. They also have played a pair of WCC teams in San Diego and LMU, who they both lost to. They also lost on the road to Memphis. They lost to Houston. They lost to Georgetown, Tulsa, and Cal Baptist. So they've played a mix of some really solid programs, some maybe not so great programs. Really only notable win is Missouri, but that is a very big win for a school in the SWAC conference. So shout out to Jackson State for securing a win there. KenPom currently, as we're recording this, has them 255th in the country, and they are somewhat balanced in terms of their offensive and defensive efficiency. 250th in the country at offensive efficiency, 235th in the country at defensive efficiency. They play at a tempo a little slower than Gonzaga, 114th. Gonzaga has been floating around in that 70 to 80 range for tempo. So both teams that like to get out and run, but aren't necessarily doing it as often as some of those teams at the top of the list. The main name to keep an eye on here for Jackson State, the guy who's going to do most of the damage for the Tigers, is Ken Evans Jr., 6'5" combo guard, averaging 17.5 points per game, just under 5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. He is stuffing the stat sheet for Jackson State, also shooting a tad under 42% from three. So he's a guy that if you lose him on the court, I'm guessing Dusty's probably going to draw the assignment against him defensively. And he's certainly a guy who could make Gonzaga pay if he has a nice night offensively. Want to talk about our top 5 things to watch for / keys to the game. Again, for those of you who are everyday listeners, you know that we either do keys to victory if it's more of a, hey, this is what Gonzaga needs to do to actually win. If it's a game like this, we're more likely to talk about, hey, these are kind of what I'll be watching for. And in a game that is before a 9-day break, that is the second full game after Luka Krajnovic's injury, there's a lot that we're going to be watching for. And the first thing, and it's kind of been a thing we've talked about in a handful of different shows the last couple of weeks, is about Jun Seok Yeo. And what I really want to see in this game is just more confidence from Yeo, particularly on the offensive end of the floor. Because defensively, he has looked good, and I don't have a lot of doubt about his ability to impact this game defensively against Jackson State. I hope to see him play 18 minutes minimum. I would love to see him play 25. There's not really any compelling reason not to give him a significant run. We did see Mark Few start Yeo earlier this season in a game similar to this and bring Dusty Stromer off the bench. I suppose it's possible they will do that again. I don't really care whether he starts or not. I just want to see big minutes from him, and I want to see some growth from him offensively. Again, the defense I think is there. Is he going to be an elite defender against, the best players in the NCAA tournament? No, probably not. But he has shown that ability to be an impactful defensive player against every opponent that he's played. We saw some really nice stuff from him defensively against Washington. We've seen it in these types of games as well. But I want to see the offense. I want to see him look more confident offensively, take the right shots, not look hesitant, drive to the basket. We just haven't seen a lot of Yeo putting the ball on the deck and trying to get to the hole. He hasn't done that much this year. And I know it's in his bag. I know he's capable of doing it. I don't know whether he's feeling restrained by the offense, whether he's feeling restrained by the coaching staff, what it might be in that situation. But let's see him put the ball on the deck. If he commits an offensive foul, if he fumbles the ball away, that's okay. That's okay in this kind of game. I think we're willing to let him make those mistakes, because you have to make those mistakes at some point, and it might as well be now in this kind of game. I'd like to see him post up. I don't think that's something we've really seen from him. He's 6'8". Part of the benefit of being a 6'8" small forward is being able to take bigger guards down under the block and score on them. I think he's capable of doing that, and we just haven't seen it. Those are the kind of things I want to see from Yeo in this game. Again, the defense, we'll see that, because we know that he's there with that. But I want to see some offensive gains from him in this game. Thing number 2, Dusty Stromer playing the 2. Again, if Yeo's going to play a bigger role, the Zags need to find ways to get Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman a break. That is, if I sound like a broken record, it's because I am a broken record, because we've been talking about that since the beginning of the season. It is now more urgent with Luka Krajnovic out 4 to 6 weeks with a wrist injury. And Yeo playing the 3 and Dusty sliding down to the 2 is an obvious, and one of the only really obvious ways to do that for Gonzaga. If Yeo's playing the 2, it doesn't change his role that dramatically, offensively or defensively, than it would be playing the 3. There's not a huge difference between the 2, but I would want to see Stromer add some outside shooting, because either Nolan Hickman or Ryan Nembhard are on the bench if Stromer's playing the 2. Nembhard has not been a great 3-point shooter, but if he's on the bench, you still want Dusty to be able to space the floor. You want to see some more facilitation from him, more of him making that entry pass, more pick and rolls where he's coming off screens, driving to the basket, maybe using that floater game. So kind of similar to Yeo, more offensive creativity, more offensive intensity, more confidence from him on the offensive side of the ball. Key number 3, let's find some confidence from beyond the arc. Jackson State is allowing opponents to shoot just under 38% from 3. Their 3-point defense is 346th in the country. They're one of the 15 worst defensive teams in the country in terms of defending the perimeter. This is a great game for Ryan Nembhard to boost that 3-point percentage in a major way. This is a big game for Dusty Stromer to do the same. A good game for Jun Seok Yeo to find some of that confidence as a 3-point shooter. The bigs have been shooting it well, but let's get some more reps. Why not get some more opportunities for Braden Huff, Ben Gregg, Anton Watson, even Graham Ike to space the floor and hit some of those three-point shots? Thing number 4, some growth from Pavle Stosic. Stosic has not played much this season, but he's played enough that I don't think there is a plan to redshirt him anymore. He can play up to 4 games and still redshirt. I don't think Gonzaga is going to push him and redshirt him. It just doesn't really make sense. I don't think that's the plan at this point. And in this kind of game, I think you'll see 4 to 5 minutes from him at the end of the game. A 5th big getting more development is not the most important thing for Gonzaga. The depth is an issue in the backcourt. It is not an issue in the front court. But at this point, any players who are getting more ready to contribute to this team is a good thing. Gonzaga might run more 3 big lineups. There might be lineups where Watson's playing the 3 and then Gregg and Ike and Huff are alternating between the 4 and the 5. In that case, having Stosic potentially more prepared to play is going to be valuable. You never know what's going to happen if there's more injuries, if there's foul trouble, things like that. And if Gonzaga does want to lean into those 3 big lineups a little bit more, having Stosic more capable of contributing is important. Reminder for folks who haven't paid much attention to Stosic, he didn't get to campus until late September. After the school year started. He is really raw, really fresh. And while I'm sure he's learning as quickly as he can in terms of practices and certainly just overall learning about the college experience, more game reps is going to help him. And I think that's a key for him in this game, is to get some more time on the floor and opportunities to kind of learn trial by fire, learn while actually being on the floor in a real game. And then key number 5, not only just walk-on minutes, but some first half walk-on minutes. I think one of the things Gonzaga might have to do this year, particularly in games like this, is play Joe Few and or Colby Brooks in the first half. Not early, not immediately necessarily, but it's really easy way to get Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman extra rest is to not play them for the last 3 minutes of the first half. They get a longer break, then they get halftime. They're even more refreshed coming into the second half. I don't think Gonzaga is going to do this against like St. Mary's or Kentucky or in the NCAA tournament, but they can do this against teams like Jackson State. They can do this against bottom half teams in the WCC, who we will talk about momentarily. And I think that's a good way to get those guys a longer break. For Joe and Colby, they're not going to be rotation guys. If you see them in the first half, you can ask me the mailbag question if you want to. But I'm going to tell you right now, no, I don't think these guys are going to sneak into the rotation. I don't think they're going to be consistent contributors for this team, but they can be used as ways to get the starters, namely Hickman and Nembhard, an extra break. Also, what a great early Christmas present for Coach Mark Few if Joe is able to score his first actual field goal as a member of the Gonzaga team. He has scored from the free throw line. He has yet to make an actual bucket in real time. Maybe this is the game where we see that again. Brooks, a guy who can contribute to this team in small spurts as well. We're going to pivot now and talk about the WCC. It is near the end of the non-conference slate, so we're going to assess the damage in what has been, quite frankly, a very rough campaign for the West Coast Conference. All that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. As the weather gets colder, the college basketball offers stay hot on FanDuel. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time than right now to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use, and there is a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. And right now, Gonzaga is at negative 220 odds to win the WCC. And we're going to talk about why, but I think I'm smashing that. Absolutely. The Zags are for sure going to win the WCC this year. If you're with me, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get in on the action this college basketball season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, folks. We are doing WCC Wednesday up today. Haven't been doing a ton of stuff on the WCC. We've talked St. Mary's a handful of times. We've talked a little bit about some of the other programs. There's a great interview with San Francisco head coach Chris Gerlofson on Locked On College Basketball last week. If you have not checked that out, highly recommend it. I really enjoyed talking to him. He gave us some great insight into the upcoming game against Gonzaga and some other things going on in his program. But right now, what I want to do is we're going to talk 4 teams in the second segment here, four teams in the final segment. we're just going to talk about what's been going on with these teams, their winning record, who they got coming up next, and kind of what it means for Gonzaga. We'll start at the top with the Gales, 6-5. And I'm going to tell you right now, I am recording this before their game against Middle Tennessee at 7 p.m. on Tuesday night. By the time you're listening to this, hopefully they secured a victory. Earlier in the season, I don't even think I would have just assumed, but with St. Mary's, the way they've been playing, you never know. They should take care of Middle Tennessee State. So ideally, their record 7-5 by the time you're listening to this, but they came into that game with a 3-game winning streak over Cleveland State, also wins at Colorado State and UNLV. Their other wins are Stanislaus State, a D2 school, and New Mexico. They, of course, have that big loss to Weber State, also losses to San Diego State, Xavier, Utah, and Boise State. And this is what's interesting about St. Mary's. Yes, it's been a bad start to the season. They were a top 20 team preseason. They are now barely in the top 65 at KenPom. They have been one of the most disappointing teams in terms of preseason expectations to now of anybody in college basketball. But because Randy Bennett played such a good schedule, and I know that is a weird statement to say for those of you who have been following Gonzaga basketball and WCC basketball for a while, but because Randy put together a quality schedule, their resume doesn't actually look as bad. It's just because the expectations were so high. The only bad loss, is Weber State, and that's not a good loss. Don't get me wrong, it's not a good loss. I'm not going to sugarcoat that one. San Diego State, they haven't been up to par, but that's not a horrible loss. Xavier is a fringe NCAA tournament team. That's not a great loss, but it's also not terrible. Utah and Boise State are also both fringe NCAA tournament teams. So none of these are good losses. This isn't UConn for any stretch there, but these are all quality teams. Additionally, at Colorado State is a massive win. It's a better win than any win Gonzaga has by a good amount. UNLV and New Mexico are also really good wins. St. Mary's played enough of a challenging schedule to still have a bank of good wins, even when they're having one of the worst seasons we've seen from them in a while. And they have not been good. And the issue is pretty simple. The hallmark of St. Mary's program is efficiency offensively. If you're going to slow the pace to a crawl, if you're going to make the other team take 29 seconds to get a shot up, if you're going to take 29 seconds to get a shot up and you're going to play at that pace, it only works if you are super efficient. And this team is not. I mean, it really isn't a whole lot more complicated than that. They're not efficient anywhere. They're shooting 27% from three as a team. That is horrible. They're shooting 42.5% from the field, also horrible. They're shooting 61% from the free throw line. Do I need to say it again? Yeah, it's horrible. This team is really, really inefficient offensively, and that is killing them. Aiden Haney's averaging 14.5 points per game. That seems about right. But he's 37.5% from the field, under 31% from three. And then Augustus Marcelonis, the guy who was kind of tasked with replacing Logan Johnson offensively, stepped into that starting role, 9.5 points per game, but he's shooting 38% from the field, and he's only 22.5% from three. For St. Mary's to figure it out this year, those guys are going to have to be more efficient offensively. Up next, they got Northern Kentucky on the 21st. They got Missouri State on the 23rd. And then they got themselves a little Christmas break before they take on Kent State, quality mid-major program there on the 29th. Moving on to San Francisco, like I said, if you want to learn more about the Dons, Friday's episode of Locked On College Basketball interview with Coach Chris Gerlofson, highly recommend checking it out. The Dons are 8-4 on the season. They got themselves a trio of wins over Power 6 programs, but let's not pretend that it is a particularly good group of Power 6 programs. It is DePaul, who's probably the second worst Power 6 program outside of Louisville. They also got a win over Minnesota at the Chase Center and then Vanderbilt. So certainly looks good to have wins over Big East, Big Ten, and SEC teams, but these are not exactly the powerhouses in those programs. They also got wins over Seattle U, which they needed to fight really hard for, and a win over New Orleans. Their losses, no bad losses for San Francisco right now. Boise State, Grand Canyon, Arizona State, and Utah State. All good programs, but I'll tell you right now, if you're Coach G, and he talked about it, you really needed at least two of those. It's tough to have 4 losses, even against good teams, especially if you're trying to vie for an at-large bid in the NCAA tournament. Right now, they are 70th at KenPom, although they are 15th, 1-5 in adjusted defensive efficiency. This is legitimately one of the 2015 best teams defensively in the entire country. That is absolutely something to keep an eye on when the Zags take this team on later in the season. Marcus Williams is the big breakout star for them. He was great last year. This year, with more on his plate after some departures, he is really stepping up. 15.8 points per game, 3.5 boards, 3.1 assists, 1.5 steals per game. And beyond that, the transfer portal additions of Jonathan Mobo and Mike Sheriff Jomps have been fantastic. Mobo's averaging about 14 and 10 with 3.3 assists per game. Sheriff Jomps, 9.5 points, 3.3 boards, and 3.3 assists. Next up for the Dons, they got Northern Arizona tonight. They got Fresno State 2 days later on the 22nd, and then they'll play Mississippi Valley State on the 30th before they get into conference play. 2 more teams to get here before we get to our final segment. LMU 7-5 on the season. They got a nice win over the Runnin' Rebels of UNLV. That's really their only good win on the season. Not a particularly great schedule for the Lions this year. Their losses are to Yale, Stephen F. Austin, Oakland, Nevada, and Santa Barbara. They're 125th right now at KenPom. Big jump after Gonzaga's at the top, and then St. Mary's and San Francisco are really close together at 64 and 70 right now, and then LMU down at 125. Teams averaging 76 points per game. They are shooting over 36% from three. They're also a very balanced scoring team, 7 players averaging over 7.5 points per game, led by former Zag Dominick Harris, 15.1 points for him, shooting 47% from three, lighting it up from beyond the arc coming off the bench. Not doing a whole lot else, not a lot of point or rebounds, not a lot of assists, more turnovers than assists. Hasn't really demonstrated those point guard skills, but 47% from three and 15 points per game is pretty darn good for the Lions. They got Colorado State. Should be a really good game for them on the 22nd. Week later, they got Tarleton State on the 29th. Then we got Santa Clara, the Broncos, 8-4 on the year. They started out 6-0, looking like a really sharp team for Herb Sendek, and then they've gone 2-4 ever since. They do have 3 Pac-12 victories. They beat Oregon in a neutral site game. They hosted Washington State and beat them, and then they went on the road and beat the Cardinal of Stanford. Their losses, nothing too bad here. Ohio State, New Mexico, and Utah State, all NCAA tournament teams. They do have a loss at Cal, interestingly, the worst of the 4 teams that they have played in the Pac-12. But hey, you take the good wins. If you get a bad loss, it happens. 5 spots behind LMU right now at KenPom, 130th. The big issue for the Broncos, turnovers, about 14 per game on average. The big name to know for them, just like we saw Jalen Williams get drafted 2 years ago. Brandon Pajemski got drafted last year after transferring from Illinois this year. They might have another one in Adama Ball, transfer from Arizona, French prospect who never really found playing time for Tommy Lloyd. Now he's averaging 15.6 points, about 4 boards, about 3 assists and a steal. He's also shooting 41% from three. Really big, long, agile, athletic guard. He's going to be a problem for everybody in the WCC. Santa Clara is playing San Jose State tonight. They got Duquesne on the 23rd, and then close it out with Gonzaga's opener, Yale, on December 30th. We're going to close out the show today with 4 remaining WCC programs, including 2 of the biggest fallers in KenPom's rankings in literally all of college basketball. All that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, LinkedIn Jobs. Folks, these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best and most qualified candidates available. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which helps find the right people for your team faster, and they do it for free. It's super easy to create a free job post, and then all you do is add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. From there, simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates who have just the right skills and experience so that you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and ultimately hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, closing out the show today with 4 more WCC teams. We'll start with San Diego here. There's a big gap between, again, Gonzaga is at the top, and then you have San Francisco and St. Mary's are very close to each other. Then there's a bigger gap, and then Santa Clara and LMU are very lumped together. And then there is a very huge gap before you get down to San Diego. They're currently 210th at KenPom. That's right. Only 5 teams in the top 200 at KenPom in the WCC. It is, for those of you who have listened to the show for a while, you know I am a big champion of the WCC. Today is not that day. We're not celebrating the WCC today. It has been a rough go this season, and we're going to talk about it to close out the show here. Again, San Diego 8-4 on the season. They got a great home victory over Arizona State. Hosted the Sun Devils and beat them in their own house. Really nice victory for Coach Steve Lavin and the Toreros. None of their other wins are particularly noteworthy. They got losses. They lost at Utah State. They lost at Stanford. Don't really expect them to win those games. They did lose to UC San Diego and Hawaii. Those are games I'm sure you'd like to have back. Again, 210th at KenPom. They are 48th in tempo. So that'll be something to watch when Gonzaga plays this team. Is they're going to try to get out and run and gun and go. And that could make it for a more interesting matchup, at least. They're not particularly efficient with the basketball in their hands, though. As a team, they are averaging 12.7 assists per game, but 14.3 turnovers. That has been a big issue in the short-lived Steve Lavin era. Deuce Turner averaged 6.5 points per game last year, but he's breaking out in a big way this year for the Toreros. 14 points, 2.8 boards, 1.8 assists, and a little over a steal while shooting 37.5% from 3. They also have a true freshman in Kevin Patton. No relation there, but he has been having a very nice season for San Diego. A little under 9 points, 5 boards, 2.2 assists, also a little over a block and a steal per game while shooting about 35% from 3. Next up for the Toreros, they got South Dakota on the 21st. They got an 8-day break before they take on Fresno State on the 29th, and then they play on New Year's Eve against Westcliff. That is how they close out their non-conference slate. Next up, Pepperdine, 215th at KenPom, just 5 spots behind San Diego right there. They are 5-8 on the season, and they don't have any wins of note. Concordia, Lafayette, Long Island, Idaho State, and UC San Diego. Those are their wins. Meanwhile, they got some pretty rough losses, including a recent 22-point loss to Louisville. And typically you wouldn't consider that a horrendous loss, but man, Louisville has been very, very bad in the last year and a half. Coach Kenny Payne is on his last legs, and Pepperdine losing by 22 in that game definitely does not look good. They also have losses to Indiana State, a trio of teams in the Big West in Davis, Fullerton, and UC Irvine. Houston Millett is the star. We're not surprised by that at all. He's been great the last couple of years in the WCC, currently averaging 17.5 points, 3.6 boards, 2.5 assists, and a steal, shooting a solid 40% from 3. They also have Michael Ajayi, 17.5 points for him as well, 9.8 rebounds, 2.1 assists, and 1.2 steals. Big loss for them is Javon Porter is not playing for them, the younger brother of Michael Porter Jr., fantastic talent, NBA caliber player, considered before the season to be the best NBA prospect in the entire WCC, so not having him suiting up is definitely hurting Lorenzo Romar's squad. They got William and Mary on the 21st, and then they also will play Westcliff on the 29th of December. Next up, Portland. Portland should not be here. These teams, for those who haven't paid attention, these teams are in order of their KenPom ranking. Portland is 232nd in KenPom, one of the biggest droppers in the entire college basketball sphere. St. Mary's has been the biggest disappointment in the WCC. We'll get to Pacific, who are the biggest dropper in college basketball, but Portland deserves a little bit of criticism here too. 232nd in KenPom. This isn't the Terry Porter era anymore. They should not be down in this conversation. 6-6 on the season. They got a season opening win over Long Beach State, which has aged well as Long Beach State has picked up some really big wins, including USC and Michigan. They also have a win. Portland also has a win, I should say, over Wyoming, UC Riverside, and at North Dakota. But the losses just keep piling up for the Pilots. You're not concerned about losses to Nevada and Grand Canyon, but you're concerned they lost on the road to Portland State, to Tennessee State, to Air Force, to North Dakota State. That you can't be losing those games. KenPom, again, 232nd in the country, 297th defensively. This has never been Shante Leggins' specialty, but they're almost not in the top 300 for Division I teams defensively. They are really struggling to guard anybody so far this season. Tyler Robertson is the star for them. He's back for what feels like his 8th season at the University of Portland. 17 points, 4.4 assists, 3.8 boards, shooting 38.5%. They also have a star freshman to keep an eye on. That's Tyler Harris. I was blown away the first time I watched him play against Long Beach State in their season opener, and he has looked like a fantastic addition for this Pilot squad. 12.7 points, 8.3 rebounds, also 1.3 blocks, and 1.5 steals, and he's shooting a clean 50% from three. However, the Pilots are not getting nearly enough from Chris Austin, who missed all of last year with an injury. The hope was he'd come back and be a big star for them. 9 points on 32.5% shooting from three. Juanse Gorosito was kind of expected to be a potential sophomore breakout candidate for the Pilots. He's only averaging 4.5 points, and he's shooting 26% from three. The Pilots have one more game in their non-conference slate against Hawaii on the 21st. Hopefully they're a team that can turn things around getting into conference play. Closing out the show and the WCC conversation with Pacific, 5-8 on the season. They are 348th at KenPom. To be fair, that is 116 spots lower than Portland. They are far, far, far and away the worst team in the WCC, according to KenPom, according to the eye test, according to just about everything. 5-8 on the year. They just picked up a win over a Division II school in Stanislaus State. That stopped a 5-game losing streak. They have some really bad losses. Sam Houston State, North Dakota, Northern Arizona, Idaho, UC Davis. They have a win over Cal. I guess that's a notable win. Cal's not particularly good, but they beat a Power 6 program, and considering the teams they're losing to, you're going to take that. They also have 2 wins over Mississippi Valley State and Lemoyne, 2 of the worst Division I teams in the country. Those 2 wins were by 1 point. They barely beat Mississippi Valley State, the worst team in college basketball. They're 0-11. They're 362nd out of 362 at KenPom, and Pacific almost didn't beat them. My co-host for the Locked On College Basketball podcast and friend Isaac Shade, he's been tracking the biggest risers and the biggest fallers at KenPom from the preseason to now, and Pacific is legitimately the biggest faller in all of college basketball. This team is in tremendously bad shape. 351st in the country in offense. That means they're one of the 10 worst offensive Division I teams in all of college basketball. 64.5 points per game, 41% from the field as a team, 30.4% from three, 60% from the free throw line. This team can't hit the broadside of a barn. They are a very, very bad offensive team. 2 guys in double figures, Nick Blake, 11.5 points, Judson Martindale at about 11.1. But honestly, guys, Leonard Perry's job is in trouble. Like, we've been talking, for those of you who listened, we did a WCC roundup before the season, and we kind of thought, hey, the WCC was one of the very, very few conferences that had no coaching changes this last cycle. And we thought, well, there's not a lot of likelihood that any other coaches are going to change this cycle. But right now, I don't think Leonard Perry holds on to his job. This has been a really disastrous non-conference season for Pacific. Really hard to hire at Pacific. I'm not sure who they'd find if they lost Perry or if they decided to let him go, but it's hard to hold on to a guy who's putting together one of the legitimate worst offenses in the entire country up to this point through 13 games on the season. They got Fullerton on the road coming up next, and then Cal Maritime, a non-D1 opponent, to close out the non-conference slate on the 30th. It's going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. We'll be back with a recap of the game on Thursday, of course, and then that'll close us out for the week. We'll take Friday off, be back with a couple fun holiday-themed episodes early next week here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thanks so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. And until next time, as always, go Zags.